Hi, I'm Graham from Polaris Bushcraft, and in this video we're going to be looking at how to sharpen your bushcraft knife. Now, this is something that never ceases to amaze me. People come on courses and they own knives, and when you look at the knives just to check before a wood carving session, make sure everybody's knife is safe and sharp, people start making confessions about not having sharpened their knives for long periods of time or ever, or not being confident about the technique that they're using and whether they're really getting their knife sharp. So we're going to show you a couple of simple techniques that will solve these issues for you. Now, when you're sharpening your knife, one of the first things that you need to consider is the profile of the blade. And by the profile of the blade, what I mean is if you imagine looking at it from a cross section. The most popular choice for a bushcraft knife is what's called a Scandi, or sometimes also referred to as a flat grind, which means from the cutting edge the angles come straight back flat from the cutting edge up the blade. So it's very easy to place the knife blade on a block at the right angle to sharpen it. There are also knives that are convex and have a curve, and they're a little bit more complicated to sharpen, and there are also hollow ground knives which tend to have a dip shape where they've been ground out before the edge is put on, so it gives you a very narrow edge to feel on the block, and they're also harder to find the right angle. Fortunately, this easiest blade profile to sharpen is also the most appropriate compromise for an all-purpose knife suitable for bushcraft tasks such as wood carving, but also perhaps splitting wood, game preparation and all the other range of things that we tend to use our knives for. So the most appropriate blade profile is also the easiest to sharpen. Now, in terms of how we sharpen, there are lots of different methods and indeed automated systems and all sorts of things on the market these days for knife sharpening. However, in its simplest terms, any flat rock will do. It's usually not too difficult to find something half decent along the course of a river, for example, if you don't have a stone on you. Now, the technique that I'm going to show you, it will work on different types of stone. I'm going to use a Japanese water stone. The main reason for using that is it's slightly less messy using water than oil. And obviously water's free. I do have an oil stone here. Now, water stones themselves can be quite expensive. This oil stone's been in my family for I'm not quite sure how many generations. So this was the first stone I ever learned to sharpen on, just with a bit of 3-in-1 oil, and it works absolutely fine and puts a brilliant edge on. But it's big, it's bulky and it's messy, so it doesn't tend to get used much these days. Obviously, if you're out in the field, you need something far more portable, a smaller stone or perhaps another alternative, and we'll look at that shortly. But to begin with, let's deal with the technique. So obviously, because we're on a bench or a block, we can have something a little bit bigger. So the water stone's a decent size, and my stump here has got a bit of a lip on it which can kind of help keep the stone in place if it's slipping around. If you are having a problem with your stone, you're using it on a flat surface and it's sliding, a good way to prevent that being an issue is to simply make a sharpening base. So I've got a big lip here to catch on the edge of a table or a worktop, and a thinner lip here to catch the stone, and obviously then the stone can just sit on there and I can push away and it won't move anywhere. It doesn't work on the stump because it's too narrow, but for flat surfaces and tables that's ideal. So whether it's an oil stone or a water stone, you need to keep it lubricated. The reason for that is that the lubrication actually helps in the process. So as the water sits there on the stone and we begin working, material is going to wear off of the stone and wear off of the knife blade and build up like an abrasive paste there, and that's actually going to help with the process of sharpening the knife. So we want that to stay on there as long as possible, but we can't be sharpening when the stone becomes dry, or the pores of the stone will actually get full of metal and it will stop working. So I'll show you two variations of the same technique. Now, the most important thing is to get the angle of the blade right on the stone, and the way that we're going to achieve that is by popping the blade up onto the grinds. Now, because this is a flat ground blade, the blade is completely flat and then there's only one angle change and then it slopes to the cutting edge. So we can put the knife on the block, put our fingers near but behind obviously the cutting edge, and we can feel the blade pop up, and there should be a gap here big enough to maybe to fit perhaps the edge of a 50p coin under there, and you can feel the blade sitting firmly and flat on the on the appropriate angle for the grind. And then all we're looking to do is gently begin to wear away material. Now as we're doing this, there are two approaches, and a purist will tell you, and not without merit, that the only way to get your knife truly sharp and to maintain the cutting edge is to use a curving stroke on the block. And the reason for that is, if you think about it, what we're doing here is we're doing a series of straight little patches of grinding, and as we get to the bit of the blade that curves up to the point, they will become little straight facets with an angle in between. So the blade's not going to move quite as smoothly, particularly through wood, as it would do before. So it's not the biggest problem in the world. Better to have a knife that's properly sharp on the cutting edge, even if it doesn't have that nice smooth curve, than to have one that's blunt. But if you can, it's better to use the curving stroke. If you're struggling with it, then you can use this method. So we're just working our way along, and I'll show you the curving stroke in a second. We're working our way along, wearing that same side, trying to maintain a consistent angle, and what we're looking for is to feel some swarf or a bit of a wire edge build up on the opposite side to where we're working. Once we begin to feel that, that's telling us that we have ground away enough material to come back onto clean material on the blade edge, and unless there's a big lump out of it that we're working down to, then that's telling us we've come back as far as we need to go. So we're looking to do that on one side and then flip over and obviously do the same thing on the other. Now I'll just show you that curving stroke. So the idea here is, rather than doing it in a series of straight movements, we're going to go for one that curves up and allows the knife blade to stay on that same profile, but to come all the way down the block and off, so that it's always being ground at 90 degrees ish to the cutting edge. So here we're starting off this way, but by the time we get down to here, for that still to be the case, the knife has to have rotated not quite 180 degrees, but quite a long way through. So that's what we're trying to do, and the more sort of muscle memory you get, the easier it will be. We've got to remember this is, of course, the coarse side of the stone, so we're going to be repeating the process. So what we're trying to do here is quickly remove enough material to then get onto the finer stage. So I'm feeling for that wire edge. That feels okay. So now we can flip over, keep the stone nice and moist, and work on the other side. So again, we could approach it like this, which is obviously quicker and easier, and it is easier to keep that perfect angle as well. Or we can do the curving stroke, which is by necessity a little slower. You can see all the water on the stone is getting shifted to one end, so we can't let it dry out. I have to add a bit more water. And then, when we're happy with what we've achieved with the big stone, with the coarse stone rather, we can move on to the finer side to finish the process off. And obviously this is exactly the same, it's just a lot smoother. So again, we could be using this technique and just moving along, so working first flat bit and then a bit further away from the handle. And if you're using this technique, you have to be a little bit more careful to actually keep the angle correct here at the tip, because the handle moves quite a bit in your hand as you get to this point in order to keep that angle the same. So we could do it that way, or just feel that wire edge developing. Now, as I said before, waterstones are quite expensive. I know a couple of instructors who have never bought a stone and have no intention of ever buying a stone and have no need of buying a stone, merely by using wet and dry sandpaper carefully glued very flat to a wooden board, which obviously you can use with a lubricant or you can use it dry. Now, for field sharpening, this is perhaps as good a thing to carry as anything, because it's a lot lighter even than a portable stone. So once we're happy with this grinding part of the process, the next step is to strop on leather. Now, the reason we strop is we've created an edge with some sort of swarf ground material that's curved one way and then curved the other on the block, on the stone, and become smaller, but there's still some material there, and we want to get rid of that without it taking along with it any of the cutting edge we want to retain. If we were to immediately begin to cut with this, it would fold that little waste material over straight away and leave us with a dull edge, and it would possibly snap off and even take away material going into the blade. So to avoid that, I've got a board here. I just carved this quite some time ago, so you can tell by the state of it, just out of a pine plank, I think it was. Wet and dry on one side, which I can use just like the stone, and often I do use rather than getting the water out and making a mess if it's only a quick sharpen. Likewise, I also tend to carry this with me because it doesn't weigh anything. Stout bit of leather on the other side, and the idea is to drag the cutting edge, pulling it away from the cutting edge across the surface of the leather, and what we're looking to do is effectively fold those little almost microscopic burrs left and right so that they snap off cleanly without taking any of the cutting edge with it. Now, this technique here will also stand your cutting edge back up when it's begun to bend over when you're carving or doing anything else with your knife. So it is worth revisiting the strop regularly when you're using the knife, and it will stay sharp an awful lot longer, and you'll have to do a lot less sharpening as a result. So you might have to do 50 strokes each way. It really depends, and it's up to you when you think that you're happy. Now, a good test for the sharpness of a knife, certainly for wood carving purposes, is whether it's sharp enough to cut paper without tearing it. So the idea being, you put the knife on the edge of the paper, and this paper is a little damp, but as you can see, it cuts cleanly through, no sign of tearing, and if it'll cut through paper, then it's going to cut through wood absolutely fine. So I'm happy with this knife. That's nice and sharp, it's nicely stropped, so I can put that back away in the sheath. Now, talking about sharpening in the field, obviously you might buy a small oil stone, a small whetstone, or indeed possibly get one of these little diamond stones, which are quite effective and quite clean. You can make yourself a little strop with a bit of wet and dry sandpaper on the back, and that's very, very light, although obviously a lot bigger than some of the little stones you can buy. Another good solution is this, which is actually an axe puck, or an axe stone. It's got two different coarsenesses of stone, one quite smooth for finishing, one a bit more coarse for taking away material. but it comes in this rubber case, which does avoid a problem I've had with portable stones in the past. Inevitably they will get dropped, and when they get dropped the rectangular ones tend to snap in half. Obviously this is nice and protected in the rubber case, and you can use it in exactly the same way as we've just used the whetstone. It's a slightly more awkward surface, but you can still put it on there and work away in exactly the same way. And with this stone it is meant to be used dry, so there's no water and no mess. So I tend to use that for field sharpening quite a bit, because I can do my knife and my axe with it. Now, if anybody has got any curved or hooked bladed knives for wood carving, spoon knives, bowl knives, that sort of thing, they can present a little bit of a headache, because obviously you can't get the curved blade onto a sharpening stone very easily. Now, some are sharp on the inside of the curve and some are sharp on the outside of the curve. The ones on the inside of the curve, there's no way you're going to be able to get that on any kind of conventional stone. A really good solution for this, again, a nice cheap solution, is the wet and dry sandpaper. This time, wrap tightly around a stick so you've effectively got a nice little rod of wet and dry, and then you can just draw it along, and if you're doing an inside curve you can roll it around the inside, and it's amazing how quickly this will bring your knife up to a lovely sharp edge again. And just like with the big bushcraft knife, regular sharpening means it's never going to be much of a chore, and it's always going to be a couple of strokes and the job done. Okay, so hopefully that's solved your sharpening problems, whether it's for your spoon knife or your bushcraft knife. For more articles, tips and details of day workshops and courses, go to www.polarisbushcraft.co.uk or follow us on Facebook. Thank you very much.